Yeah, I'd like to thank you all for coming out today. I think this will be fun. It's rather spontaneous of me and quite an opportunity for me to share. I have lectured on the subject of technology and monitoring in arms control and in peacekeeping probably about 30 times in different fora. In Sandia National Labs, the place that safeguards the nuclear weapons stockpile of the US government, where I was looking at conversion projects into peacekeeping technologies. At the National Defense University last year, and around Toronto and in Pugwash conferences. And as an academic, I like to delve into the issues, but as a practitioner, as a peacenik, as Meta says, I like to actually see how things work. And I've been following the United Nations technologies since those early days in the early 1980s. In fact, I was at Convocation Hall as a starry-eyed undergraduate student, and John Polanyi and Dick Garwin gave a speech. And we actually managed in those days, in the peace movement, to fill the hall with over 2,000 people, Convocation Hall. There was a great concern that the nuclear war was a possibility and that Ronald Reagan, who had just been elected, might actually end this world. And the movement was, we had the Mayor Art Eggleton at the time coming, and we managed to rally a large number of people to the cause of peace. And one of the talks that was given there was about an international satellite monitoring agency. And John Polanyi was a professor of chemistry, still is, and he spoke about ISMA, and I was fascinated by it. I thought, what an interesting idea to have a satellite monitoring agency that's part of the United Nations that would be able to help the UN with peacekeeping, with arms control, with early warning of conflict. There's so many different aspects of the UN's mandate. And so I decided that I wanted to talk to him more. I thought, why don't I use the cover of being a journalist for the student newspaper. At that time I was at Scarborough College, and it was called Balcony Square, and later on became called The Underground. And so I went to do an interview with him, the first interview of my life. And I came with a little tape recorder, and I was sitting on the far end of his office, and I said, well, Professor Polanyi, I'd like to ask you lots of questions. And I started asking questions about his past, about his connection with Leo Szilard, one of the designers of nuclear weapons, about the chemistry. And he basically realized that I didn't have a clue about what I was going to focus on, that I just wanted to chat with him. So he asked me, here, could I take your tape recorder? And put it in front of him. And he gave a 2-minute talk into my tape recorder, handed it back to me and said, thank you very much. So I wrote up the interview, published it, and he was pleased with the interview, and I started to gather information about this, and then started visiting New York and was very happily starting to learn about the UN. And when I was down in New York, I made an inquiry to the Department of Public Information. And I said, this new organization, Science for Peace, scientists, mostly physics and chemistry professors in Canada, had applied to the UN for associated status. And I said, how is that application going? And they said, oh, I'm so sorry. We accidentally had misplaced it. We had some summer help in, and now we're going to get onto it within 2 weeks. We will get you an answer. So I came back to the University of Toronto, and about 40 professors were meeting in McLennan Physics Labs right there on the ground floor. And I made an announcement to the assembled professors that the application was back on track. Just like a little note. And all of a sudden I found myself kind of like a hero among the professors. Maybe it was because I was one of the few undergraduates there and I was expressing an interest in peace issues. But here I was thinking that all professors were gods. I know much better now, having become a professor, how untrue that is. But I found myself in the midst of the professors and having done some good deed. And very soon Derek Paul, that time the treasurer of Science for Peace, asked me if I'd like to be representative to the UN. Now, I was a chemistry student. I thought, how the heck could I have anything to do with the UN? But I've pursued this idea of the positive applications of science in order to counter the negative applications. So arms control on one side, trying to make sure that the nuclear weapons weren't ever used. On the other side, how can you use technology for verifying arms control treaty, including Nuclear Weapons Convention, the SALT treaties, the START treaties, most recently the Moscow Treaty. And how do we use the technology for the United Nations? And that became a kind of preoccupation. So I started taking notes, and eventually I managed to publish my first article in this cutting-edge magazine of the day called Peace magazine. It happened to be an issue of Peace magazine where John Polanyi was on the front cover because he just won the Nobel Peace Prize. So 3 years at a Nobel Chemistry Prize. Later on, he attended the Nobel Peace Prize ceremonies in 1997 when Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs was created, won the Nobel Peace Prize. And he was, so he'd actually gone to Oslo twice. But here he was, well, Oslo once and Stockholm the other time. Here he is winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And I wrote an article on peacekeeping satellites for the United Nations. And still in the Cold War, talking about how the superpowers had an unstable balance of power and that we needed to have a stronger United Nations. And Meta kindly published this article, one of my very first, in 1986. About 1 year later, I took time off from a master's degree, spent doing research. I was rather fortunate by getting a grant from the Canadian Institute for International Peace and Security. And I wrote a book called Peacekeeping Satellites, The Case for International Surveillance and Verification. And that became sort of my main hobby while I was doing the chemistry and physics in the background. So I went on to graduate studies, to PhD studies, and the research director of CIPS, the Canadian Institute for International Peace and Security, told me they were now putting on a scholarship, CIPS scholarship, and that I should apply for it. But I said, look, I'm in the chemistry department. How the heck can I apply that to the international peace and security? He just shrugged his shoulders. And what I know now is that they expected very few applications because it was the first year, and he was just trying to get more applications out, and he kind of gave me a tip. Well, I thought, one of those light bulb moments in your life that makes a difference, I thought, why don't I use my work? I was in the chemical sensors group in Lash Miller Chemistry Building, a couple of blocks away from here. Why don't I look at the detection of chemical and biological warfare agents, do the basic chemistry, the physical chemistry, but apply it to international affairs? And so I got the scholarship. What it really meant is that I could spend a lot less time in the library, in the lab, and looking through a microscope, and a lot more time in the library, in Robart's library, reading about arms control and getting fascinated with the international affairs. So I started moonlighting in that, and then the PhD became the definition of eternity. I just couldn't finish it. I was too interested in doing the peacenik stuff. I was going to the UN. I made over 200 trips to New York, and I was just fascinated by the organization and the assembly of the nations of the world there, and being able to get a glimpse of the international community. And so when I finally did finish my PhD, thanks to my sister coming down and doing a lot of lab experiments for me, I decided that that was enough of that. I wasn't going to be doing any more chemistry. I could have published several papers out of my PhD thesis, but I just wasn't interested. And I already had an office in St. Hilda's College, where I was a research associate in international relations, and foreign affairs had given me $25,000 to be able to do a study on intelligence gathering, intelligence in the United Nations sense. How can processed information be used in peacekeeping? Well, around that time, Romeo Dallaire was having his travails in Rwanda, and we saw missions in Somalia and Bosnia, and peacekeeping looked like it was floundering. So I said, well, what technologies are they applying? And I found out that they were so basic. They were not using advanced military technologies. They weren't using the technologies of 10 years back or even 20 years back. And I realized all the more reason why we should focus on technology and peacekeeping. So thus began a dedicated career where about 1/3 of my time I was looking at technologies for verification. I started publishing, presenting at conferences, and trying to get the word out, lobbying at the UN, pushing them. You should be using night vision devices. Peacekeeping shouldn't be just a daytime job. The bad guys are out there doing their human smuggling, their arms trafficking, their pillaging, raping, and killing at night. And that's why the UN needs to take control of the night. And I thought that we should look at getting technologies for night vision. And the US government had a ban on shipping night vision technologies to the United Nations. So they were using really 2 generations back technology from what was available. And then I said to myself, well, I've got to show that this can be done. So over the time, my frustration mounted as I saw that the UN wasn't using technologies. And at the same time, the technologies were getting cheaper and better. So that was the process. There was a huge need for the UN to monitor what was going on. They were deaf and blind, as Romeo Dallaire said about his mission in the field. They didn't know what was going on far away. They didn't have a sense of early warning to be able to take preventive action and robust responses. And I started to work on that. And eventually, I started to get a bit of pull from the UN. We want to know about how we can use UAVs. I worked as a consultant to try and get UAVs. And fortunately, last December, they brought their first UAV into the field. But even before that, I was so frustrated that I started to see that on the market, there was a whole bunch of other technologies that were applicable. And some of those technologies were in the military domain, and some of them were in the commercial domain. So I did this overview slide when I was at Sandia Labs about the technologies, looking from the top right, the satellite reconnaissance. When I first entered in the field in 1986, the US had a resolution, minimum resolution that the commercial companies were allowed was 30 feet. You couldn't get an image less than 30 feet. And Ronald Reagan in '87, realizing there was international competition, released US companies from that minimum resolution. And at this point, you can get satellite imageries to 2 feet. The commercial imagery allows you to get them from commercially launched satellites at 2 feet. Then I looked at airborne radars like the AWACS, Airborne Warning and Surveillance Aircraft that NATO uses. It's a common NATO aircraft, commonly funded. And that can give you control of an airspace over an entire area like Lebanon, where the UN was responsible for saying what kind of overflights were being done, what kind of violations of aerospace were being done, and yet they to this day, they do not have that technology. Airplanes they were using in the 1960s, through some archival work, I discovered that the Swedes brought in dedicated reconnaissance jets. But after that, the UN's never used reconnaissance jets after that. So that's still a new technology. On the left there, helicopters. Now, the UN had used helicopters, and I've been to the Congo. In fact, I was there in July. And they have these glass bubbles, and people look out with their binoculars, and they bring in their cell phone cameras, and they take pictures of what they're seeing from the helicopter. But that just doesn't do it in a day where there's gyro-stabilized pods that you can attach to helicopters. You can give them forward-looking infrared, and you can begin to do observation at night. And then UAVs. You know, there was a revolution in unmanned aerial vehicles, but the UN wasn't tapping into it. Now, no one has considered the idea of armed UAVs for the UN. That's an anathema for the UN. That's not something that they are even contemplating. But the use of eyes in the sky as a tool for monitoring for peace and security, that is very much key to the UN's mandate. So the whole idea of UAVs.
What does UAV stand for?
Unmanned aerial vehicle. There's also unmanned ground vehicles, UGV. You also may hear the term UAS, unmanned aerial system. So that's the vehicle plus the ground control station and the communications link between them. And then sometimes you can throw in the analytical software to interpret the images to go with the UAS. On the ground, there was a whole bunch of available technologies. Ground penetrating radar were being used by people in the archaeology department here at the U of T to be able to look at ruins and discover where you might find graves. That could also be used for discovering mass graves after atrocities. It could also be used for arms. When people are signing a peace agreement, they don't want to give up all their arms, so they decide, let's hide some of our weapons. They bury them in crates in the ground, and if the peace doesn't hold, then they'll go in, dig them up, and you'll have the arms. And that actually makes the peace less stable because they resort to force more easily. So ground penetrating radar could be used. You get acoustic sensors, and I had a colleague in Germany who was looking at how he could automate the use of artificial ears so that you could hear the sound of a tank, and he could differentiate between a Leopard 1 and a Leopard 2 tank. And in Bosnia, I heard about a soldier who was very creative. He took a walkie-talkie system and he made it one way so that he would listen to the sound of tanks in the distance if they were rolling. Or in the case of the Accords, which were very shaky Accords in between 93 and 95, both sides would put their weapons in cantonment. That is, they would put them into storage, and it would be a double lock system. So the UN would have one lock, and the party would have the other lock. And in order to get access to it, the UN is supposed to be able to unlock it and say, yes, you're allowed to break out because defend yourself against an attack. But in fact, what the parties were doing was just smashing the UN lock, taking their vehicles, and going out and bringing their armored personnel carriers, their tanks, and other heavy artillery out into the field. So this person put a walkie-talkie on one end, so it was only listening. And the UN didn't have enough people to guard every location. So when they heard the engines turning on, uh-oh, they're at it again. We better go out onto the road and block the road so they can't bring their vehicles through the road. And that was a peace measure. So that was a very creative use of an acoustic sensor, which was just a walkie-talkie. Ground surveillance radars were routinely used in military operations. The British military used it when they were setting up a camp in an isolated area. It would send a signal around an area, and it would bounce back, and so you could see anything moving within 10 to 20 kilometers. And that could be used for a demilitarized zone for the UN. If they wanted to know, is anybody entering into the demilitarized zone, then they could send out a patrol to see what was happening. It's very good at night because, like all other radars, it can operate in all weather conditions and at night. It could monitor waterways, as I've shown here, if there's illegal shipping on borders. And it can be put in some areas which are rather difficult for the UN to get access to. So that's one form of another radar. There's another form of radar, which is artillery locating radar. And that is when parties are firing artillery shells at each other, then you want to know who fired first. And usually it's just explosion, explosion, and the UN, which is supposed to bring the truth out of the fog of war, is just clueless about who shot first, who violated the ceasefire first, and what was the escalation procedure. Well, with this kind of vehicle, you can tell the trajectory of the shot and see where it started and where it came to. So you have the opportunity for being able to point fingers. And indeed, finally, in 2006, the French brought in this artillery locating radar into Lebanon, and they were able to show when Hezbollah, they fired about 8 or 9 different rockets into Israel to date, and they're able to say where they came from. If they came south of the Litani River, it was the UN's fault because they're supposed to control that territory, and keep a good watch over that area. Then you have simple things like infrared brake beams. If the beam is broken, that means somebody's trespassing. Or taut wire fences. If someone tries to climb it, then they're pulling on a wire, sends off electric signal, and the UN can send out a patrol to be able to check who's breaking into a compound, including the UN's own compound, or compounds where they have the weapons stored. And pressure transducers. If the UN has a checkpoint, then they might want to know someone's approaching, because they just saw that a car went over the pressure transducer. And then seismic sensors. Last I show here is that even the sound of footfalls on the ground, it creates a sound vibration that moves not through the air, but through the ground. It's a seismic wave. And they had been used for a number of decades in arms control to detect nuclear blasts and differentiate them from earthquakes. But this can also be used, for instance, you could spot in good soil conditions somebody walking 20 meters away. And that could be sent off to saying, somebody's trespassing in an area, or they may be assembling. Like in the Congo, they often assemble at night from different points, converge on a place, and then attack at dawn. That's the usual modus operandi of the rebel forces. All this information has to be put back into a rapid response mechanism, which, because the UN was often clueless what was going on, they didn't have that. So a new model of operation, which is now being used in certain operations, is what you call concentration with mobility. So they have very mobile forces, usually heliborne forces, that can actually monitor and respond quickly to situations and drop into zones where there's a potential conflict, try and separate the parties, tell them that they're better off not fighting, and that they even sometimes, like in a hockey match, when the referees have to push themselves between the people who are punching, the referee gets risk of getting a fist in the face. But at the same time, the UN does that on a level between guns, says we're going to put an interposition zone here and make sure that you are not, the parties are not attacking each other, and that way they can hold it at some risk themselves. And the last point technology I forgot to mention when I was doing the aerial part is an Aerostat, a tethered balloon which can be used as a landmarker. It can show where the where locations are, and you can also put cameras up in them so you can observe from above. And the UN has never deployed that. So having reviewed this area of technologies and having done contracting work for DBKO and reviewed it, presented to the member states of the Special Committee on Peacekeeping, 120 member states, on how the UN could improve, I got a pretty good idea of what the UN had, and I did what was called a gap analysis, what they have and what they need. And the result of that was actually a book published called Keeping Watch, Monitoring and Surveillance in Modern Peacekeeping, which I thought I had a copy of. Okay, you brought it over there. So yeah, in fact, I can see there's enough copies there to actually sell them afterwards. We can sell them to you for $20. And it's a book that was published by UN University Press and got widely circulated, and fortunate to say, within the UN Secretariat, which is one of my key audiences, and member states. So that work came out in 2010. Meanwhile, the UN progress was so slow. I was just saying, you know, why can't they deploy a UAV? Why can't they use an unmanned ground sensor? Why can't they use night vision devices? Why can't they use some things that are in the commercial domain? And what I found is that in the commercial domain, things were getting better. The technology was it was a technological revolution, like the cell phones. You know, we say about computers that there's no, the performance to price ratio has gone up a factor of 100 billion from the first computers. My dad assembled the first IBM computer in Canada in the early 60s. It had 2K of core storage. And he told me about the days when they said, well, we can now increase that to 4K of core storage, but they scratched their heads and said, what can we possibly do with 4K? And so we've seen now we have terabyte drives, 10 to the 12 as opposed to 10 to the 3. So 1 billion times better. And the price has gone down from tens of thousands of dollars down to a few hundred, or even into the tens of dollars for the very simple computers that can be used. So they've gotten better, they've gotten cheaper, they've gotten smaller. What we have now in one cell phone is far better than what was available in the large mainframes 30 years ago. And there's a convergence. So this phone can also be used as as you know, as a camera. It's an internet connection when it works. It's also a GPS system, so it provides me with positioning. And I can, from here, tell where my friends are located, or where the nearest store is, or get an idea of where we are. If I want to look on Google Maps, I can give myself precise positioning, which is so important when I want to look when I'm in peacekeeping, and you need to know where your peacekeepers are. So this technology is giving you something that was the holy grail for peacekeepers, which the UN still doesn't have, which is situational awareness of where all their staff are at any one moment. Believe it or not, they don't have that in any of their operations now. They don't have that. But it's possible through the convergence and through this convergence of all these technologies into a device. Also extremely versatile, the way that the ingenuity. When I think about, they do these app sessions, 24 hours, they do a competition, come up with all kinds of creative apps. I've recommended to the UN that they launch an app system to look at how apps can be used for peacekeeping. And that way you can turn some of the brilliance of all these apps developers to the cause of peacekeeping. And there's a lot of goodwill for peacekeeping. It's just a matter of harnessing it. And fortunately, all this has been commercialized. Now, what really shocked me was that the technology was not only available for to professionals like the archaeologists I was mentioning, but was becoming toys for boys. These were toys. Now I have a little 5-year-old boy in me, and I thought, well, how come I can't have those toys, and how come I can't share those with the UN? And kind of like, go to Goma and tell the UN, look, you've been trying for a decade to try and get UAVs there. I'm going to show you how it's done. You've been trying for aerostats. They haven't been able to put an aerostat up. I've got them interested in deploying them in Mali now, but they haven't yet done it. So I thought, why don't we just show that this can be done? That was the origin for this demonstration. So what I've done is I've assembled my toys. This is show and tell for Professor Dorn. And I'd like to be able to demonstrate them to some of you. Forewarning, not all of the toys work. And there's a certain level of danger here, so I don't have insurance, just letting you know. But we'll have a lot of fun, okay? So we're going to just see how well they work, not having tested them out in the room, and some things are a little dependent. So this is my demo kit, monitoring kit, at the top left is my unmanned aerial vehicle, Parrot drone, with, if you had to know, I have the indoor hull on, otherwise it flies in the outside as a UAV this way. That is to protect you from the blades. I also have brought an unmanned ground vehicle. It's advertised as a spy tank for kids. And it's supposed to have the green glow so you can look at your parents while they're sleeping. I also have something that hunters have used. This is a device that is used to be able to signal when there is an animal passing by. It will take a shot. So these are infrared illuminators. The animal doesn't see it. It shoots from here. And then you can know that an animal was in that area. It's also used for wildlife conservation. And I'll show you some images from that. The aerial side, until about 2 minutes before lecture, I had an Aerostat to show you. The result of the Aerostat is going to be my first failure of this demonstration, which is also very useful. This was, Shelley, how big was this balloon?
It was bigger than the double door wide open.
Double door wide open. So this was filled with helium. It's capable of carrying a GoPro camera, which is now used by sports enthusiasts, which can then, through the cable that I have, convey the messages and the signal down to the ground. Unfortunately, this balloon didn't take some of the when it's expanded, it's a very vulnerable surface. But we've done a makeshift job for you here. And to show you lighter than air, we'll be able to see what we can do with a little bit of balloons there. A few other goodies I'm going to demonstrate, but let's start with some of the fun stuff. So let me start with something that I know will work. Ground surveillance vehicle. Now I'm pleased to say that the United Nations has used ground surveillance vehicles on one occasion in the mission in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and I'm also pleased to say it was a Coyote reconnaissance vehicle from Canada. So it has a mast that goes up to 10 meters high. It has radar on it, and it has a visual camera. And it can send the signal to afar. But Canada, unfortunately, is no longer in the peacekeeping business. We haven't provided any vehicles for the UN since that time, and we only provide 34 peacekeepers, unfortunately. In 2006, before you know who came into power, we had 10 times that number of peacekeepers. And 10 years before that, we had 100 times that number of peacekeepers. We had 3,300 Canadian Forces personnel in peacekeeping. And when I asked my students how many of you had peacekeeping experience, none of them have had, or almost none of them have had UN peacekeeping experience. It's a tragedy that the Canadian Forces is no longer equipped for peacekeeping. But we did in the past do some very pioneering work on the idea of a ground surveillance vehicle. So what I'm going to demonstrate here is the unmanned ground system, UGS, in the form of a toy. So I'll just demonstrate it here. It runs off of an Apple computer, an iPad. It communicates through Wi-Fi, so I have to be able to get a Wi-Fi connection. And it does it through this little antenna over here. The camera is in front, so it will be viewing you, and I will see whether I can get some nice pictures of you while we're get some nice shots of this nice audience. I first have to make sure that the Wi-Fi, which is currently on U of T, will be able to pick up the signal, once I turn it on, from the unmanned ground system. So I'm waiting now for to recognize that I've turned that on. And from the Apple, I can also transmit. I can put it online to the internet. Now I'm not going to do any of that. I respect your privacy. But we will look at what kind of systems we have in a second.
I guess alternatively, it could work with a SIM card, right? The cell phone.
Yes. I can also run it off my iPhone and my other devices, and I could transmit. And many people take these images and put them on, especially when you come to the aerial. So it's now connected to the rover, which I'm going to show you here. I go to a program which runs the rover. This is all an idea. The benefit of my being not well organized before this lecture is I downloaded all this within an hour before this lecture. So it's just going to show you the versatility of a rover system. So this can be, there you are, from the imagery that's coming now from this tank. Yep. Okay, anyone want to wave? Okay, there you are. Okay, now the next part is to show you that I can move it. Well, one of the nice features is that it can actually be done this way. So it's just has that kind of versatility. Oops. I have to be a little careful here, not to get carried away with my emotions. Or get my Aerostat. So it also can be controlled, if you don't want to control it that way, you can control either side. So I can move one side of the tank that way, or I can move the other side that way. There you are. Okay, so that's an idea. Unmanned ground system. The UN has deployed this with some contingents in some operations, mostly for IED, counter IED. So you know that something's out there. You don't want to send a person. You check it out with an unmanned ground system. But as an observation device, not being used by the UN. Something you'd think this should be standard fare. Cost me $100. I bought it at LaGuardia Airport, and it should be should be easily on the agenda for a UN peacekeeping mission. Now a little bit more risky. Sure, please.
Are you saying that actual vehicle, that little thing that can almost fit in your pocket, like to put it down on the ground and send it into the Congo and expect it to some pictures back?
Yes, it could. It would be a good way to test it and to play around. In the end, you want to get a robust, ruggedized version, so that it, this is kind of not really, it wouldn't last for very long. It's meant to be a toy. But considering this is $100, you could test this. I mean, I'm going to actually give a few of these to the UN just to be able to show them. I haven't yet gone to UN headquarters and demonstrated the technology, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, look, as an academic, I kind of gotten tired of telling you that you can do this, and you have a budget of $8 billion a year for peacekeeping. And here what I'm going to show you I can do all for under $1,000, all these different toys, and how it could increase vastly your capacity for nighttime surveillance.
Couldn't some kid just pick that up and take it home?
Sure. So you'd want to be able to do it in a controlled area. Usually if it's in a UN compound, or if there's an airport where you want to do a surveillance in the ground. A lot of these things are vulnerable to just being picked up. But then again, if some kid picks it up and takes it home, you've lost $100. You haven't lost, the cost of a Predator drone in the millions of dollars. The commercial off-the-shelf technology, COTS, is now brought down the price so that it's so reasonable that you can afford to lose these things.
And presumably you're using it in a situation where there's actually some real danger to human beings being there.
That's right.
So it's not like you're sending it to a playground. Right?
Yeah, and good point. It's what I call the peacekeeper's dilemma. They're most needed when the going gets tough, to observe the fighting. And yet that's the time when they most want to withdraw, or their safety is most at risk. So that's where technology. There was a short observer mission in Syria, and they couldn't move out of their hotel. They would get shot at when they went out of their hotel. So I said, well, why not use a UAV there? And I was lobbying at UN headquarters. They needed Syrian government permission, so they didn't deploy UAVs there. But it would have made so much sense, and if there had been some lobbying, they could have deployed UAVs into the area. And this is a UAV that I'm going to demonstrate now. The riskiest part of my demonstration. I'm going to attach the battery, and then it will the battery will send off a signal, which I should be able to catch from my from the iPad, which is, by the way, Meta Spencer's iPad that I've just loaded beforehand. So thanks to her for rescuing me as I forgot my iPad at home today. This drone I got at the Future Shop on Yonge Street. Yeah. Well, this used to be cutting edge. I mean, this would be like things the Pentagon would pay millions of dollars for. Now it's so available. And I went to the Future Shop and I said, look, the AR2 drone, it looks really cool. You can play with it on the iPad like that. And when I bought it, I just took a second take. I look, my God, what's the picture there? It's got a picture of the New York skyline. You know what that center building is? It's the UN Secretariat building. So there you go. It's like custom made for my purposes. So I am now going to choose the AR2 drone in order to send the Wi-Fi signal so I can control it from the iPad. Then I'm going to see if I can fly it. Now, different rooms have different aerodynamic conditions, so I never know exactly where it's going to go. It's not quite under my control. It creates a little bit of traffic, wind around it, so that it's always a little risky. But anyhow, we like to have fun, right? Yeah, that's right. In fact, we all know that technologies can fail, and sometimes they can fail spectacularly. So that's the image from the front of the AR2 drone. So you can see it's pretty good imagery here. It has two cameras, one forward-looking camera. It also has a camera underneath. This costs about $300. It has an altimeter, which is used for sound echo, so it knows how far it is above the ground. Now that's one of the things that confuses it. When it goes to the side of the table, then it will kind of like confuse about whether the ground is there or up here. But the benefit of that is that it can do automatic takeoff and landing, so it can know how high it is to have a soft landing. It's got an emergency feature there, which I may need to push in a minute or two. And it's got the capacity to look the downward camera, front camera. So let's take off. Now I want to make it go a little bit higher in the air. So there you have it. Let's see if I can control. Yeah, that's right. Very good idea. Let's see if we can. Other way. Okay, I'm going to land it pretty soon because it's stuck. It's hugging the wall. There we go. This is the indoor hull. It protects it from for the blades. Otherwise, the blades, when they hit the wall, they will damage the blades and possibly damage someone who comes here. So the UAV is really quite a fun toy. It's best outdoors, but it can be run indoors. You can get an idea here of the capacity to record, to take photos. Okay, I won't take your photo. It gives you the height and its line of sight. So if it disappears, it's a Wi-Fi signal and it ceases to communicate. But for $300, lots of fun to play with and lots of potential applications.
What's the battery life?
Battery life is about 20 minutes. So it's one of the weaknesses. And when I bought several extra batteries. But I'd have to land them in order to run it. Battery is one of the main challenges for these technologies. We've had progress in batteries, but no revolution. We're all waiting for that revolution whereby your cell phone can last many days on a battery, and it's just been kind of difficult. Okay, so that was one aerial surveillance technology. Also the Aerostat. Now, this is a camera that's very popular with sports enthusiasts. Skiers put it all the time on their ski helmet, and they take pictures. It's an excellent camera. It's got a wide-angle lens. It does really good images and videos under fast motion. It goes up to 30 frames per second. 30 frames per second. Let me see if I can get the GoPro camera. There we are. 60 frames per second in full high definition, 1 megapixel photos, and you can program it to take a picture every, if you want to do it in photo mode, up to every minute. You can take one picture every minute, or you can get 60 pictures in 1 second. And it has fisheye, so it's a distortion, but it does allow you to look at the world through the eye, and it's very robust. It's meant to be. You have a case that you can do underwater. This is the Hero camera. Costs $300, and I've actually assembled the Aerostat, which unfortunately we just found out how vulnerable this is. But this is actually a weather balloon. It's usually sent up into the higher atmosphere, and so it's not meant to be touching ground and that sort of thing. Hence, when it's expanded, it becomes very much thinner and becomes more vulnerable to that. So the Aerostat here. So what I have here is a set of balloons which we took helium. So I bought helium, which is from Blow-It in Toronto. They want to sell helium for party balloons. And this will give you an idea if you want to just feel how heavy this object is, and you get an idea of lift. So if you do the math, you do Archimedes' principle and buoyancy, you find that for every meter cube of a balloon, you can get a 1 kilogram of lift. So with one of these Aerostats, I'm able to lift the Hero camera that's being circulated around there, including its apparatus, and the tether which I'm using, which normally I'd use very tough Dacron wire, which I would then be able to bring the balloon up and down. Now you may say, well, look at the vulnerability of this balloon to just being scratched. Well, the vulnerability to bullets is even bigger. And in these conflict zones, people will see that and they'll say, well, I want to shoot that thing down. It'll become a favorite target. But you can get them now so they're compartmentalized. So there are many compartments. So you put one bullet through it, it goes down halfway. Put another bullet, quarter way. And so you'd have to be able to shoot them all at the same time and get them all in order to have it crash the ground. That way you can have your device at the bottom, which is protected because of the capacity for slowly coming down. Now, Canadian Forces did use a persistent threat detection system, PTDS, in Afghanistan, in Kabul and Kandahar. And after a while, people got tired of shooting at it, and then it just became a stable fixture of the mission. And it became a set of eyes and ears, which is eyes in the sky for the mission. And people could, every 2-3 weeks, they would go and they would take the Aerostat up and down. And of course, it was sending imagery in real time to the mission. So that's an Aerostat, and this equipment I can all do for under $500. And the helium I just bought the other day, I could fill up 10 Aerostats of that size for about $100. So very reasonable.
What about hydrogen?
Hydrogen is, unlike helium, is a flammable material. You may remember the Hindenburg. We don't want any Hindenburgs, and I wouldn't want to actually bring in hydrogen into a room like this, just for the fear of it becomes flammable, other things catch on fire. It might be a better lift, but it's just more dangerous. Helium is an inert gas, and as you may know from parties, people can actually inhale it and make funny voices, not to be recommended because it replaces the oxygen in the atmosphere, but people can actually inhale helium and survive. So now if you don't want to be able to put things wide up in the air, you can just use a mast. So just a simple monopod or tripod in the air, which can be used on a base. So in the center of your base or your refugee camp, you want to have an idea who's coming in and out. You have a camera that sweeps the horizon, and it's just on a mast. And that's very cheap to do too. It's like putting up a radar antenna. So you can be able to put normal cameras on there and be able to display the images from those cameras just using a simple mast. And it can be extendable. Another thing that's a very common tool for artillery officers and for soldiers is what's called a laser rangefinder. It sends a laser beam to a target, it bounces off of it and comes back to a device like this. This is used it could be used for golfers. They want to know how far it is to the next golf hole. So they would put this on here and they can look, and I'll pass this around. You can aim it, by the way, it's eye safe, so you don't have to worry about blinding anyone. You can aim it at a wall nearby, look through, and it should tell you the number of meters it is to that wall. This one here is saying 5 meters. You need to have a wall that's at least 5 meters away, but it looks through here, and that can be very important when you want to know how far the fighters are. What's their exact position? Because you don't have their GPS system, you have your GPS position. So you can link a laser rangefinder to that. It can tell the distance and the angle to that group, and then you can tell where they are from your GPS system with a laser rangefinder. So it can be used as laser. You are able to, thank you. You are able to lase something, but what I've recommended to the UN is get their UAV. They have the UAV flying in the Congo. It has a laser rangefinder, but it's not in the optical spectrum. It's lasing in another part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And what I would recommend is if the UN sees that fighting is going on, get that lasing dot to be a red dot. Someone looks down, they see that their chest is being lased, they know they're being watched. And they may worry, what's on the other end? Is someone lasing me because they have a sniper rifle? So at that point, the UN can actually identify from a UAV where the person's position is, what they're doing, and tell them, look, we are watching you. And that's quite possible, even from kilometers away. In fact, the UAV that was deployed in the Congo, I was shown imagery of it, and they were at a 5 kilometer slant angle, so 5 kilometers away. They were watching a village in northern part of the eastern Congo, and they were watching a soccer game, or football as they call it there, and they could watch the soccer ball moving back and forth. I could see the soccer, see the squares in the soccer from 5 kilometers away at an altitude of about 5,000 feet. So just a fantastic capability. And the cameras there were actually made in Canada by Westcam in Burlington, Ontario. The MX-10 camera they have, and the Canadian Forces use an even better MX-20 camera. And the capacity for remote monitoring is just unbelievable. Well, the MX-10 is a camera that has both a visible camera on it as well as an infrared. So it's like a pod, and it sits in the UAV, and it's steerable. You can do pan, tilt, zoom, and you can do sweeps of the area and monitor what's going on 20 kilometers away. You can see a person easily at 5 kilometers away and at night.
Elevation? What altitude?
Typically, they fly at around 5,000 feet. What you want to be is away from the AK-47, the ground fire. Now, it could be susceptible to a missile, surface-to-air missile. It could be shot down by a plane in the air. But in order to have an AK-47, which is the most common instrument in these areas, you want to be at least 1,000 feet up. So the bullet reaches up there, stops, and it doesn't manage to reach the UAV. Sometimes you might want to buzz an area. So take the UAV, fly it down in the area, let it hear your buzzing sound, and to let them know that you're being monitored. But then you are subjected to possible ground fire. Now, one of the challenges that when you put a camera like it's on this UAV into the air is that you might have the vibration of the plane, so you won't be able to get a still image. But there are ways of overcoming that, and one is using the age-old tool called the gyroscope. The gyroscope makes the camera that's on the airborne device, it makes that camera as a, it makes it in its own inertial frame of reference, so that it forgets that it's on a plane, and it just thinks about itself as a device that's in relevance to the initial place when the gyroscope was started. So it can be even used to be independent of the sun, independent of the earth, and you can use gyroscopes for all kinds of monitoring in fantastic ways. Now, these gyroscopically stabilized cameras, they now have them even in cell phones now. So they're done not in this way that I'm going to show you here, but they're done in a way that uses microelectronics. But it's still an incredible technology. And often you can get these binoculars, gyroscopically stabilized. So you move them around like this, and it just stays on the image that you want. You can similarly put them in UAVs. And so I'm going to demonstrate now if this device is going to cooperate with me. I'm going to show you the gyroscope in action just by creating its own inertial frame of reference. You can do that by pulling on this rope. If everything's cooperating. Let me just take off all the tape I made here so that I don't accidentally run the gyroscope. This creates the gyroscopic effect that causes an inertial frame of reference for a camera so that it's unaffected by vibrations. And this can be used in satellites, it can be used in aircraft, especially things that are jittery. It can also be used for ground systems. Okay, so let's just illustrate this gyroscope. Okay. One of the things is that the gyroscope, oh heck, I just made it go. So you can sort of see it's in its own frame of reference. I'll put it down on the table maybe. I kind of slowed it down when it was up there. But, it's slowing down now. But you can actually stand it up on the stand. Yeah, I could hand this around. What you can do is you can feel that it has its own force. I'm just trying to catch it so that it can stand up on, maybe we'll get a little bit of it here. When it's running fast, it will actually go sideways. So you got a gyroscopic effect. It's running its course now, so it's run down. But so the gyroscopes are again kids' toys. They're also useful for physics classes. Learn about angular momentum, and they of course they have these tremendous applications. So use there. Ground sensors. I promised to show you this device. So I hired 2 high school students. I said, see what you can do with this device, whether you can capture any images. So one of the high school students brought it to his cottage, and they were able to see his father taking out the garbage, a suspicious car when they were not at the house. They saw a car came around, did a U-turn. They still have no idea what the car was doing there. This device detected that there was an object moving, took pictures of it. They could take out the SD card from inside here, and they could get a sense of what was going on. You can have a video delay so that every motion doesn't cause it to take images. You can keep it on for anywhere up to 1 minute of video. You can have the sensor on high, medium, or large. So this clicks in and out here. Just pass it around here. You can see it's fairly heavy because of the battery power. The devices on the front are to do infrared illumination. Thank you, Shelley. So I'll see if I can't illustrate that. Again, the infrared illumination saturates the area with infrared light. Now, as you know, the visible light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum we see with our eyes between 400 and 700 nanometers. When you get to wavelengths, which is the size of the wave, the electromagnetic radiation, it's larger than 700 nanometers in the infrared part of the spectrum. And that means that you can take images that people can't see. So, this car will not know that it's being taken image of. This is a night infrared image, so you can see the things that are bouncing off in this that part of the spectrum are showing up in that area because that person's being illuminated. And here they have a car taking off. Okay, let's try the gyroscope again. Better second time. So I'm going to just give it a little bit of tapping. Oh, it's not staying up very well. You can see how it's at an angle now, not touching the ground, but it's able to stay at an angle now. It's touched the ground because of the while it's going, just hold the top or the bottom, and you can see that it has a just hold the top or the bottom part, and you can see, move it around a little bit. You'll see how it has its own angular momentum, a will of its own, if you like, and that's what you benefit from when you're using gyroscopes. And these can be used with infrared cameras, with the visible cameras, to be able to create the stabilization you want.
So it's like night goggles, right?
Yes, now I do have some night vision. I'd like to be able to share that with you. Because it's not night, regular daylight will blind this device. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can look at through the amount of light that will come through here is just that pinhole. And you'll be able to see night vision through that pinhole, the amount of light that's going through there. See, provided that everything's working. We used to say in the sciences, check your equipment beforehand. I'm afraid I didn't do that in this case, so I'm a little worried that the battery might be. Yeah, I seem to have. I left the battery in there, but I'll pass this around just so that you can. You won't actually be able to see through this. I have to get a new battery. This is a night vision device. Costs around $1,000. Made in Russia. They are experts in night vision, and it allows you to see those images. I'll get. The images are typically green images, so what you see there is green. It's not infrared. It does image intensification, which is the amplifying the visible lights that's there. So if you have a little bit of visible light that your eye can't detect, but it will magnify it tens of thousands of times and be able to give you a sense.
And without light, completely in the absence of light.
Yes, without light, that would not work. So you want a little bit of moon, you want some starlight. Even starlight can give you the illumination required. I've walked around with these devices through the forest at night, whereas before it would be completely impossible. With these devices, the plants, you can see where they are, you can see the trees, you can see the branches. You have a much better sense. It's like scuba diving. For those of you who have done scuba diving, a new world opens up to you that you just find is rather amazing. So I talked about acoustic sensors. Well, I was thinking about how you could use acoustic sensors to detect things, and well, what's the commercial product that's on the market that's most helpful? It's a baby monitor. People don't want to be in the same room as their baby. They want to know when the baby's crying, it needs to be fed, so they create a baby monitor. Brian, have we plugged the baby monitor in anywhere here? Okay. So it's by the other camera. Testing. Okay, do you want to say gaga goo goo over there? Okay, say that a little bit louder. Okay, so you've got a little sense there that you can determine, it's a one-way radio, you can determine what the person's saying over there. Now it's also got this feature vibrate. Want to say something? A little bit louder? Okay, now it's vibrating now. So this is, you don't want people to hear what your baby is, but you want to know, okay, let's go on here. All of a sudden the baby is there and it sends a little vibration like your phone. So it catches the image and it can send you the vibrating image. This is such a simple technology you can take off the commercial market. It's even catching my voice now. Testing. Oh, yeah, as soon as I do it, it buzzes, but I can feel it, you can't. Oh, actually, I'll pass this around. So the volume control is here, vibrate on and off is there, and it's probably picking up my voice. When I'm speaking, it will send the vibration. And that, you can imagine, has all kinds of applications when you are looking at deploying them into a peacekeeping operation, and you need to know what's happening in the distance for cars coming by, or as I mentioned, when you have these weapons that are under cantonment. Dome cameras are so common that I'm actually not illustrating them here, but you can see one way through them, so you can allow the light from the outside to come in, but you can't see behind the camera. You can put them up as dummy cameras in areas where you want to have some sort of security, and they can also be vandal-proof. You can take a hammer to them, smash them, and the plastic that they're made of doesn't allow you to smash them. So low cost now because of the technology that's available and because it's highly commercialized. Motion activated light sensor. If there's one thing that I wanted to show the UN that's in the commercial area, a lot of people use it in their driveways or on their front doors, that you can have a device that doesn't need external power. It's powered by the sun. When a person walks, you can get the passive infrared, which will detect, which will come back, and then it will. There's feedback as you're bringing that device closer to the baby mic. That's what's happening there. It's kind of interesting. This device, when you walk there, it sends on an illuminator. So great for refugee camps. You have an entrance, and you want people to know that someone is coming there. And there are all kinds of attacks on refugee camps or nefarious activities going on at night. So this device powers during the day, and at night, if you want to get rid of that feedback, you just need to lower the volume on that device, and it will get rid of the feedback. So this would be used in refugee camps or outside someone's tent. So they see a light coming on, they can open up the tent and see who's out there, who's walking, who's prowling in the area. Very simple. $50 can get you this kind of device. And as I say, you don't need to be connected to the grid. You just need sunlight, which is very common in African countries where you are commonly deploying peacekeeping. An example of a technology that the UN could use if they want the parties to build confidence. They say, well, we're not only going to gather the information, we're going to share it with you. We're going to let you see what's in the conflict zone so you know the other side isn't attacking. They can actually use webcams. And you can have those webcams that are available to the UN, to the conflicting parties, certain individuals, to people who can analyze it. And then you can even share it with the whole world. So there are web cameras which we could get now, which can look at different parts. One of them is the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. I can see who is standing at the Wailing Wall now. And you can see the division between the two sides. There's a web camera on in some wildlife areas and some zoos, so you can see the birth of these animals. We even had what's in effect a web camera when the Mars rover was up there taking images. Now it's taking hours, if not days, for the imagery to come to Earth, but it was coming down to Earth from in the real time. That is, as it was being taken, it was being transmitted to NASA and then projected to the world through a web camera. So these are all technologies. Now, I want to end the demonstration with some audience examples. I will solicit your own cases, your own ideas, some of your own creativity. And I had Shelley Hanna came with some devices, which, Shelley, do you want to talk about them a little bit, or do you want me to do it? You go out into camping, or you're in the middle of Africa, and you want to be able to recharge your computer. Well, you can get a solar-powered device that has a USB port on it that can allow you to charge. Now you have to be, winding up for a long time, but you might be desperate. You want that cell phone to be working. You want that internet connection, provided there's wireless in the area, or you want to charge your computer up. So you can also use it as a flashlight, which can be charged from your computer. So this is what I call the convergence that allows you to take solar cells and wind-up technology. You can also use radio. So for instance, when I was in East Timor, I was an electoral officer there, we gave out hundreds of radios to the people in East Timor so they could get the UN broadcast, so they wouldn't have to get the propaganda that was coming from the Indonesian broadcasts. And that allowed us to tell them the real story there. And unfortunately at that time, I was giving them a number of batteries. Yep. And then I knew that after 1 month, they couldn't afford batteries. They just weren't plentiful, and it was also an environmental problem. But with the technology now, you can get wind up. So for a ratio of 10 seconds of wind up, you can get 10 times that amount of listening to the radio. So the technology is progressing where you can get these technologies which wind up for radio and for flashlight. I haven't actually tested this one. Here we go. Okay, there's so many uses. Protection of civilians, we already mentioned that. In the Congo, they used to bang pots and pans and hope that the UN peacekeepers would hear them. Now they can use their cell phones. The UN has a community alert network, CAN, that's available so that certain people have the UN number. Now they're even doing a hotline number. And they also have that in Haiti. People can call, make a complaint or an alert, and then the UN's dispatching people to that. That's part of the revolution in communication that's happened, the ICT revolution. So you can do the peace monitoring, the counter ID for things like this. They're just already starting to catch on to use these things. We have some issues. One of them is privacy. You don't want to be big brother in these areas. So obviously the UN has to grapple. This new technology gives them new surveillance mechanisms, and they'll need to be able to come up with rules, and I'm working with the UN on that, on what kind of rules you need. So my overall reinforcement of what I start off with is the convergence of the technologies, such that even our cell phones, smartphones are becoming increasingly smart and able to do more things. Toys can incorporate these technologies. Radio, Wi-Fi signal on a tank type of wheels with cameras on here, and even some night vision technology, all in a toy. becoming smaller. There's an innovation process going on that I couldn't have dreamed of when I first started in this area. Becoming more robust. As you know, the cell phones are still prone to being dropped, but as their manufacturers are dealing more and more with trying to make them more robust. So you have this commercial drive. Cheaper, and so many applications. I could keep going on. So that is my presentation, and we'll open up for questions. Thank you.